I am incredibly pleased to introduce to all of you, and their names have come up already, Dr. Rima Thomas, who's an MD PhD. She's the Associate Dean of Diversity in Medical Education, which is, I think, an extraordinary title, and we'd love to hear more. At Stanford University School of Medicine. She's also the Vice Chair of Diversity and Inclusion in the Department of Neurology, Stanford Medicine. She received her medical degree from Georgetown University School of Medicine and her PhD from the City of Hope Graduate School in Duarte, California. She completed her training as a resident in neurology and her fellowship training in neuro-onc at Stanford. And her research and background and interests are focused on immune-based cancer therapies and chemokine signaling in glioblastoma brain tumors. We also have with us Doctora Ana Nunez, who is Vice Dean, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as Professor of Medicine at the University of Minnesota. She's a professor of general internal medicine and received her doctorate from Hahnemann University and her Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Wilkes University. She has fellowships in medical education from Michigan State and health services research from the Association of Medical Colleges. She is nationally recognized as a medical educator and health services researcher, and she has developed novel curricula in the areas of sex and gender medicine, primary care, trauma, violence prevention, and cultural competence. And just so you know, she, in 2015, won the AANC Nickens Award, which is pretty much the highest award in the land for DE&I. Welcome, both of you, and congratulations on your incredible accomplishments. Dr. Thomas, we'd love to start with you.
Thank you, Monica. And I did prepare some slides, so I'll go ahead and share the screen so that we can go through some background and information. I find it really helpful to include pictures to tell my personal story, and I hope that you will take away, and I look forward to fielding questions and answers at the end. So today I will start by telling my personal journey to medicine, and I think, you know, we've heard from so many amazing speakers, and one of the takeaways that I really valued was that the term Latino, Latina, the multiple different ways that we identify ourselves really resonates with me, because where it all started was with, you know, growing up in a very diverse, immediate and extended family. You can see here my abuelita in the middle is from El Salvador. You know, and she was the matriarch of the family, and she took care of all of us, my siblings, myself, and our first cousins, because, you know, our parents had to work, and this was a very real picture from my upbringing in my backyard of kind of how we grew up. And as you can probably notice and see, we each are half El Salvadorian, but each of the families also incorporated a different race because of our fathers and my uncles. So diversity and inclusion was absolutely implicit to my upbringing and to my everyday life. And I wanted to start by sharing that story because I think it did set the foundation for who I became in my journey to medicine and who I am now. So I went on from Pasadena, LA, growing up, to undergrad at Cornell, and then ultimately to Georgetown School of Medicine. And as you can see here, family has also been such a huge part of my of every milestone of my celebration, you know, and education in particular. So as you can see here, by this point, I'm already married to my husband, who I met in undergrad, and my in-laws, my immediate family, and extended family are all there to support me. And I say that because another thing that we have talked about throughout the conference has been, who is your support network and how do you build that resiliency to take on the challenges that are necessary within academic medicine. And I would absolutely say without hesitation, it is my family, my extended family as well. So I came out to Stanford for my residency and my fellowship. As Dr. Vela mentioned, I did my neurology residency at Stanford and then stayed on as a fellow in neuro-oncology. And then ultimately, this is my immediate family. So I had my two boys during residency and fellowship, and now live here in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, and really love everything about what I do in my current kind of stage as a clinical associate professor of neurology in the division of neuro-oncology, and also as an associate dean and vice chair. So key, as I reflected back as to what were the key points and opportunities that were instrumental to my academic career and ascension to date, and a few things did stand out. So we're discussing here the journey to become an associate dean or a leader within the diversity and inclusion space. And so I wanted to highlight just a few of these. So we have heard from our very own Fernando Mendoza today, and he was the PI of the Hispanic Center of Excellence here at Stanford for multiple decades. And he brought me into the world of the HCOE as a faculty fellow first. When I first joined a couple of years into my time as a faculty member. And that brought me into the conversation as well as the space of being supported by other mentors who identified as Latino, Latina here at Stanford in terms of supporting residents, fellows, trainees, medical students in their journey as well. And I've really been so grateful for that opportunity, but also think it was instrumental to my current role. I also began as a liaison for my clinical department of neurology approximately 5 years ago in our Office of Faculty Development and Diversity. Then when Dr. Mendoza was going to be retiring, he brought me in as a faculty director for the Center of Excellence. And so there was a bit of a transition period prior to my becoming associate dean for diversity in medical education in August of last year. And importantly, also within my clinical department, I had been leading multiple efforts and chairing the committee for diversity and inclusion for multiple years within our department. And that role was elevated to that of vice chair in February of this year. And another important fact that I wanted to just mention was that, and highlight that we have been emphasizing here during this Líderes program, has been leadership training. So leadership training as it pertains to my journey was through the Stanford Leadership Development Program, which is a partnership between the Office of Faculty Development and Diversity and the hospital, Stanford Healthcare. And that was an instrumental way of learning real logistics around conflict resolution, mediation, the hospital system, the finances that take place, leadership development itself, what type of leader I am, self-reflection, but also working through the different identities that I have and how what that contributes to my leadership style. And I found that really instrumental to learning and getting to know the network of other hospital leaders here at Stanford as well. Then nationally, I always kept abreast of my academic work and in my subspecialty and clinical area of interest of expertise, and that allowed me to take part in the American Academy of Neurology Development Program as well. And last but not least, I was also thinking the first true faculty development conference that I ever took was probably my first year as a faculty member in the Minority Faculty Development Conference through AAMC. And last but not least, I touch on this, but I have always found it important to keep my academic and scholarship productivity throughout my time doing the work within the diversity and inclusion space. But importantly, I incorporated some of the academic and scholarship productivity within the D&I space, more specifically. And that was through grants and also through my clinical subspecialty in neuro-oncology, running translational and clinical trials. This is a team effort, and our team has grown. Dr. Mendoza mentioned earlier that last year was obviously a time for a lot of self-reflection for many hospital systems, but certainly true here at Stanford. And one of the things that I met with our hospital CEO about was specifically supporting trainees throughout the pipeline, not just the medical students, but then, really having an impact in supporting programs for residents and fellows. And ultimately knowing that our hope and our goal was that if we were able to support them through that journey and really have that continuum of support, that we might be able to further diversify and provide the tangible, concrete kind of foundational elements of training that would enable our trainees in residency and fellowship to stay on here as faculty. So with that also came an expansion of our office. So we have been through a large growth phase, and it has been an incredible team effort. Mark Gutierrez as our administrative director, Marcella Anthony focusing on the outreach, recruitment, and engagement of pre-med and pipeline students from community college through, and then Victoria Moreno supporting our programs at the UME level, undergraduate medical education level. We recruited a director of research development. And I highlight that because I've always felt that, like I said, keeping research, keeping the foundational elements of what the currency in academic medicine is, publications, grants, center to our mission and our goal has been really key. We have supported our leadership development at the GME level through the LEAD program. So, and then Dr. Yamane was named our assistant dean at the GME level, and Felipe Perez, assistant dean at the UME level. We also focused on supporting a faculty member to lead efforts of social justice and health equity in the medical school curriculum. And last but not least, our administrative associate, Mariana Avila, at the GME level. So again, team effort with a very comprehensive approach in curriculum management, leadership development, and research, all to hopefully advance diversity in medical education together. A couple other tangible, concrete items. We, as I mentioned, Dr. Mendoza was PI, and now I am PI of the Center of Excellence grant offered through the Health Resources and Services Administration. We also added to this with a COVID-19 telehealth grant last year, and then we've tried to really profile our trainees to really provide, more advocacy for them. So we've done different campaigns like our Black Resident Spotlight. We funded faculty fellows who are engaged in research in the advocacy space, as well as in social determinants of health. And last but not least, again, profiling and marketing our own trainees with and recognizing for their achievements through awards that we have done, in a holistic manner, but with our faculty colleagues, again, to support them and to recognize their efforts. Again, we are at an academic institution. So what does the academic institution of Stanford value? Education, scholarship. So we did so through virtual conferences this year, including our Diversity and Inclusion Forum. We had over 360 Stanford community members. These are just a few of the workshops that we held here in the virtual format, of course. And then our SUMA conference, which celebrated our 30th year in support of pre-medical students in really tangibly getting into the nitty-gritty details of what you need to do to prepare yourself to enter the health professions. And so we support our medical students in running these workshops. And this year we engaged over 1,000 pre-medical students in Stanford community members. Again, in the curriculum space, we're here to celebrate our Latino identities. And we found that there's a real appetite for our medical students to engage in medical Spanish training. So we held a course at 3 different proficiency levels, inclusive of 36 medical subspecialties, used an online platform called Canopy, and then we led language workshops that were subspecialty specific. And we had over 68 medical students at Stanford taking part this year in that course. And in summary, I'll highlight one manuscript that we published, I and others, in specifically the development of a diversity officer. This was published in neurology and was focused on academic neurology departments. However, I would say, all of the principles and points that we highlighted here really pertain to anyone who might be interested in becoming a diversity officer at their institution. And, we really focused at a high level of what are the key challenges? Is this work valued by your institution in the same way that other scientific and scholarly work is? That how do you incorporate this role into the currency of academic medicine? Importantly, not to take on a role if you don't have adequate support to do so. That might come in the form of FTE, additional staff members, coordination, type of administrative support, administrative bonuses for this work. You want that to be valued, but also for that value to be translated into the tangible, concrete ways that support is measured. Does this role come with a particular role and title, importantly? And what does that title have as influence? I've really valued the vice chair title already, seeing as, the where the decisions are being made at our departmental level are really, shown true within the closed discussions, and really having that role and title, it certainly means something at our institution. And then maintaining your academic profile with grants and publications. I think that's another key takeaway point that I wanted to share. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Vela. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly comprehensive. I don't think I've ever seen such a well-resourced, multifaceted team for a diversity, equity, inclusion office. And I think that you should publish this as the gold standard, because you really are appealing and pulling on every single lever available to you within academic medicine. And I think the rest of us need to know how you leveraged for those resources, what you used to get them, and also how you maintain all the hats that you just mentioned, because it sounds like you're helping to lead this group, but you also have the HCOE to run, manage, and fund. So I think there's a lot that we can unpack here. One of the big directives, which I'm sure drives the resources that you've been able to achieve, is deciding what metrics signal success. So when you report to the leadership at Stanford and request more resources, what are the metrics that help you to say, look, we're being successful and you need to continue to support us?
Thank you so much for those comments and also the question. I turn it back on, what does the institution value? How is success measured in advancements and promotions? How is that an indicator for where I need to focus my metrics of success? And I think that is what has driven the ability to translate, to ask for additional resources. So first, it's publications and grants. And so all along, I have incorporated that as an important aspect of the work that I'm doing. Second has been engagement of our Stanford community membership and marketing our efforts and our success. So, when I'm being asked to highlight my work in Grand Rounds, I am showcasing our team. I'm showcasing our efforts and making sure that all leaders in our institution know about us. This might come in the form of a newsletter. This might come in the form of a Grand Rounds lecture. But I have been fortunate, I have to say, that it is having key sponsors at the institution that also has definitely mattered. Dr. Bonnie Maldonado, Dr. Fernanda Mendoza. These are individuals who have become, real powerhouses in our institution, and having them as advocates and as sponsors has been really key. I also think the last thing I'll say is not being afraid to ask. I take the momentum that our students and our residents have brought to our institution as leverage. And I will own that, because when I met with our hospital CEO last year after a Black Lives Matter rally, I concretely asked, we have been supporting faculty members of color, have been supporting residents and fellows on their own. We have done so for multiple years because we know we have to look back and support our pipeline. But we have never done so. We did it for, without any administrative support. And so it was actually a pivotal moment last year to ask, obviously, for many reasons. But then at the same time, I went in with a plan. I went in with, this is what I would need. I went in with a budget in hand to say, this is what I would need to be successful. And these are the measurable outcomes that I could look to for success.
Fantastic. And I think a big point that I'm hoping everyone hears is that we do the work. It is time to reap the rewards of doing that work, ask for the support to do the work, and also communicate in a language that academic medicine understands, publications and grants. And if we haven't been trained on that, we need to partner with people and a team that can push our agenda forward and raise the voice of so many people in a way that others can hear us, and the work of so many people in a way that others can value what we do. Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Nunez, and I will put her slides up. And if you would just signal to me when you want me to advance, that would be fantastic.
Okay.
Can everyone see those?
Yeah, we just need to jump to number 1 there. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Villa. All right. Well, while we're getting to the first slide, I just want to thank everybody for being here and certainly be able to chat with you a little bit. It's interesting. A lot of the things that I'm going to mention, fortunately, Dr. Thomas sort of highlighted, which is about establishing who you are, establishing your scholarship, having your leadership skills, whether it be in various sort of leadership opportunities with, in my case, it was executive leadership in academic medicine, showing that you have the skills for oversight. As a Center of Excellence Director for Women's Health, for example, who you are and what you bring to the table is where you have to first start. I think the other piece, and this is perhaps a little bit of sort of the divergence in terms of a departmental vice chair versus a vice dean in a medical school, is also the scope in terms of the work that you do. So you have to be mission linked and relevant. So as Dr. Thomas talked about, how does this help neurology? How does this help neurologic research? How does this help sort of missions of scholarship, clinical, and education in terms of DEI? I think we are all collectively on a mission. I know I am, that diversity, equity, inclusion is like quality. It's like safety. It's like excellence. This isn't something that a few people do. Because if a few people do it, then we hear sort of things like minority tax. Women should solve women things. Black should solve Black things. Latinx should solve Latinx. And we know that that's just hooey. We all have to sort of be able to sort of be in this. At the University of Minnesota, we have made it be that on an annual performance evaluation, for all of our faculty, basic science, clinical faculty, everybody, they have to delineate what have they done in the past calendar year on diversity, equity, inclusion. So seeking sort of organizational change so that we really can sort of make that happen is really important. I'll share with you on vacation this week, I'm actually reading Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origin of Our Discontent. And I encourage people to read it to become as bummed out as I am, because it's really powerful stuff, and it sort of speaks to the issues that we need to sort of pay attention to. As a matter of sort of who I am, I'm originally a kid from central Pennsylvania. My parents, who were Puerto Rican, met in New York and felt that New York City wasn't the best place. No offense to New Yorkers, I love you all. But it wasn't the best place to sort of raise the family. And so they went to the middle of nowhere, which is an acronym for Altoona, Pennsylvania. And that's where I was born. So living quite the bicultural life, being exquisite in terms of Spanglish, eating different things than my little classmates, but being in the heart of sort of a small town in central Pennsylvania. Being able to be bi and tricultural certainly helped when I went to Philadelphia to go to medical school. But as sort of a first generation kid, there was just so much I didn't know. Doors weren't automatically opened. It was just sort of paying attention in terms of moving forward. So seeking a career in terms of general internal medicine, and then realizing that in terms of academics, I had to sort of do additional training, medical education, health services research, health policy, to be able to sort of have the skills that I needed in my toolkit for scholarship, enabled me in terms of doing community participatory research in terms of sort of community settings. Having that in my toolkit in terms of what role that can play was foundational in terms of this, especially for folks who felt that DEI was doing that community thing. It really wasn't inside the house. So in 2015, I was the first inaugural associate dean at Drexel Med in terms of DEI. And this past August, now going on a year, I was recruited to be vice dean at the University of Minnesota's medical school. And so certainly lots of fun work here that we sort of are moving forward, as well as sort of community building. At the University of Minnesota's medical school, 100% of our departments have DEI officers and DEI committees with supported time. We have numerous initiatives in terms of really engaging in system transformation. But to specifically say about sort of becoming a dean in a medical school office, next slide, please. What I'd suggest is sort of what we started with.
Sorry, I'll take over. Sorry, here we go.
It takes a village. It's okay. I regret everybody. I am not on a laptop. I'm on an iPad in the North Shores of Minnesota, so I'm not as tech able as I would otherwise. So cultivating how, who are you and how do you fit in terms of mission, clinical research, education, productive workforce? How and all those skills do you sort of cultivate your scholarship and leadership skills? How do you learn? I mean, one of the things I sort of feel that historically looking back, I was kind of an avid student of the architecture of academic medicine. How did it work? What did a dean do? What did a chair do? How did people get sort of positions on finance committees? Who got what? And sort of paying attention to that to learn and unearth much of the hidden curriculum in terms of academic medicine. Understanding where we are in terms of acculturation. Are we in it? Are we other? Usually both. And then our own agency within that space. I think about, when I talk about this, a little bit of how I survived surgery. No offense to surgeons, also love you. But one of the things we know in surgery as a clerk is that oftentimes when you cut, they would say too short or too long or too short. And my own agency is I would just put the scissors and slowly decrease it down the line and then say, tell me when to cut, right? That was my way in terms of having some agency in that space, and recognize that we are being in trauma-imbued spaces as change agents. Next, please. So it speaks to the issue of who are you? What are you known for? The cultivation of your scholarship, like Dr. Thomas so eloquently sort of spoke to us about. It talks about sort of being mission linked or several mission linked. It has to be relevant. Why are we here? If we are able to convey that DEI is in every mission, then we need people who are apt to have those conversations to see how it improves health outcomes, how it improves scholarship and our innovation and research and education. Finding and growing your own community. I found early on my community was more national than even local. And there are ways like this and other ways of, if it's not in your backyard, go on Twitter. Go to a virtual meeting, just cold call somebody and say, hi, can I ask your advice and guidance? And it's hard work. It's often outside of your day job. This isn't necessarily, and I do know that there are folks that say, I just want to come in and I want to do this. And that's fine in terms of that support. But as was warned earlier, make sure that you're not sort of just getting the title with the expectation of a lot of unfunded work, but it really is sort of part of what you're expected to do. Next slide, please. So in navigating academic medicine, things to think about: service versus promotion. Much of DEI falls within the land of service. So again, figuring out how service can be leveraged into scholarship and how that helps in terms of promotion of you and others. Very important. Passion, for which I think most people in DEI have plenty. One of my former mentees just did a presentation on his T32, and he's this fabulous young man. But the person who was convening said to him, wow, we really liked your passion and your bow tie. And sadly, he took that as a compliment. I think most of us are savvy enough to know that you are very passionate is rarely said as a compliment in medicine, which is a shame, because I think medicine would be better if it was. But being able to balance passion with pragmatism, that awareness of the organization, overt and covert, what are the metrics and outcomes that are really espoused? We may say one thing, but then all of a sudden something shows that that's not true. Shades back to Wilkerson's book about caste in terms of it's true unless we say it's not, and it is for whom we want. So important. And then lastly, just being like the ever-ready bunny, just keep on, keep on, keep on. Moving forward, having that support so you can sort of move forward. Next. In acculturation and agency, it's about self-care and replenishing your true north. What's your resources to sort of keep you there? Family, therapy, spiritual, community. You need to be okay if you're going to do this work. It is hard work. It is important work, but you have to sort of be okay. And too easily to sort of get subsumed. If I have so many mentees, I have so many things that are needed that, you're on fumes. You can't let that happen. You're too important. I think back in the late 90s, whenever a number of us came together at the AAMC to sort of push the LCME to put in cultural competence and women's health in terms of LCME sort of guidelines, that was everybody coming together in terms of that support to really have a significant sort of policy difference. But it wouldn't happen if we weren't all individually okay. We have to pay attention in terms of the assimilation. I talked about acculturation, but sometimes in assimilation, it's survival. So at what risk is it perceived in terms of selling out or losing self? There was a comment made previously about sort of, are you Latinx or not? I recently had somebody said, well, you're minority-ish, because I was Latina, right? And what I say to that is, do we really need to do the oppression Olympics? Don't we have enough to go around, right? But coming towards that in terms of sort of compassion and caring, making and finding and engaging and supportive place, and sometimes knowing when to really do it, and when to just be like a duck and go off your back. Or in Minnesota, they call ducks loons here. Be like a loon, right? When to exert and when to just play for another day. Next. So being in trauma-imbued spaces, and I talk about trauma in terms of the work of Sandy Bloom and creating Sanctuary, a common mission, productive, meaningful work, focusing on this as our joining vehicle, recognizing and learning more about trauma-informed people and organizations, and understanding, sort of be by it, but not in it. In terms of, I'm not just going to punch you in the nose because I'm frustrated. What's tomorrow look like in terms of us working forward, deploying kindness, compassion, and grace with a thick skin, because that's what the work takes in terms of creating change. Next. So take home, what all is here? Look left, look right. What's overt? What's covert? Where are you on your journey? Who all, as Dr. Thomas mentioned, who all's on your mentorship team in terms of being able to sort of connect to? And in 10 years, what will you want to have accomplished? What's your impact? What losses are acceptable? Because for every advance, we have a loss. And then how do I replenish stamina, courage, and passion? You'll see that this isn't necessarily a recipe in terms of, get these 3 articles, go for these 5 grants to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Those are important things in mission so far as scholarship. But what I'm talking about is sort of what you want to see in terms of your impact, the gifts that you have, to be able to leverage them in a way to make a change within your specialty, within your medical school, within your university. And how do you flip sort of those allies to sort of join with us? So it's an all of us thing in terms of DEI, and that you can sort of upregulate your leadership skills. So we have a different day that isn't so much one of other, but one of us. Next. Questions?
Wow. I just felt like some wisdom dropped there. And I found myself just screenshotting everything and thinking about how I'm going to prepare myself for the future. I'm certain that both of you have young mentors coming to you and saying, I want to be you. I want to do what you're doing. How, and in listening to both of you speak, you hear about negotiations, emotional intelligence, when to push, when to withdraw. And you both have a ton of scholarship. How do you mentor young people and say to them, these are the skills and that you need to acquire? Here's the content knowledge. What do they need in order to prepare for a life in DE&I?
So I'll just jump in first. It's funny. I actually had a heinous boss once. I know everybody here would be so surprised. What a thing. You have a boss that isn't sort of necessarily the best boss in the universe. But I had this heinous boss, and within a minute of sort of joining his organization, he said, oh, I want you to be known. And I'm like, okay. And again, I didn't know, right? I was sort of first gen, right? So I had the opportunity to go to AAMC. Back in the day, you could do workshops teaching people. I did that for sort of a year. I came back and I said, I'm known. And he goes, oh, I meant publications. But he didn't say that. Okay. But in truth, you need to get yourself established in your field, the go-to person. Who's the person you go to for what? What is the niche? And I think one of the challenges in DEI is it's so broad. There's so many things that like you need to be sort of that go-to person to be recognized as a leader in your field with your declared sort of mission to be that person. That's the first part, I think, in terms of sort of doing that. And then from there, sort of expanding in terms of organizational change.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And I will add to that by also sharing that I've always approached any work that I do as know your strengths, know your weaknesses, play to your strengths, So for myself, for example, I had been a fellowship program director, for 6 years first. I had done the accreditation for our fellowship. I knew curriculum. I ran, I was the education chief for neuro-oncology. So leading with educational initiatives was an easy, natural way to enter the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And that's kind of the approach that I have taken. I wasn't an expert, though, in diversity, equity, inclusion in its concrete kind of fundamental knowledge base. I understood that was a weakness that I had to read, that I had to learn about, and that I continue to engage in training around so that I can not only support trainees from diverse backgrounds in knowing how to enter academic medicine and successfully do so from an academic perspective or from wherever their clinical expertise might lie, but also, valuing and acknowledging that DEI is its own subspecialty in many ways, and we have to do that work as well.
As a subspecialty, where's the fellowship program? How did you, I am quite certain that you both self-educated and integrated your experiences into that self-education. But is there a certificate program or a fellowship program that you would recommend for young people just starting, or people just starting this journey?
I think there's a lot of programs out there.
Yeah.
I know that AAMC has some, various sites have some. I think that there is a role in terms of getting at a common natural language. I'll tell you, when I did my medical education fellowship in 1990, when I was 10 years old, there were 4 articles in the literature about cultural competence, which was the grandmother of sort of DEI. Of those 4 articles, 3 were student workshops. However, all other fields, sociology, intercultural communication, you name it, they had tons of literature, and a lot of the foundational things that come from the intercultural development inventory and things like that come from a vast, broad literature outside of medicine. So I think that there's ways to sort of take these to kind of get what is that natural language, what are the references in terms of some of these things and different frameworks. I personally can't say that there is sort of a one. There came one across my desk the other day that was in the GME space with my buddy Angela Palermo from Sinai that looked pretty cool. So there are ones popping up sort of every day. I think it's a matter of sort of being able to get that language and sort of know what are we talking about as we move this forward to be able to get there. There are some things that we've done in terms of what's evaluation and assessment in terms of cultural competency, I think, that are useful beyond sort of the tools for assessing cultural competence, so that we can get some meaningful metrics, both in mixed modality of qualitative and quantitative, to sort of demonstrate this change. Because I think that organizational change we're talking about requires a lot more scholarship so that we can get very clear in terms of the outcomes we want.
Fantastic. I do also want to mention the ACGME that was put here in the chat, Equity Matters. I think many of you will be tapped to come in. I know I've seen some of you already in these sessions, delivering lectures and creating a community for DE&I officers to replenish and to find their true north in a community that hasn't been entirely visible in the past. This is super important. How did you put your teams together And who do you, in addition to looking up to the leadership and saying, here's our metrics and what we're doing, how do you assess for what your next steps should be? And how do you assess the needs of your communities, whether it be medical students, the community around you in terms of patients or neighborhoods?
I wanted to first go back to the question we were just talking about in terms of degree programs. As I thought about, my journey, in addition to being pre-med, I did the Latino Studies program concentration at my undergrad, for example. There I learned kind of the basics, not becoming an expert, obviously, but the basics of qualitative research. I do think that is an important element to the approach that we've taken within the research arena, at least. And then more tangibly to concrete current steps that we're taking at Stanford, for example, restorative justice. And we are going to be hosting a conference next month for not just those in the DEI space, but inviting those who are educators, supporters of students, leaders of programs to understand and learn the tangible skills that go into restorative justice. Because another thing that I found is we can't just have the Latinas, minority, URM faculty knowing about this without educating others and allies and understanding who our allies are. But making this a priority for all educators is another thing that I've tried to emphasize as well.
I do think we have to sort of do a combined initiative, just as we should have advocacy as a core competency in medical school, that we should have mixed modality research. Had it not been for the AAMC's Health Service Research Institute, I wouldn't, as a chem major, I didn't know qualitative versus BOO, right? And so to learn and have the skills in terms of doing community-based participatory research, which speaks to me because it's the how and why. I think that should be sort of core competency for all of our students when we talk about sort of health of the public and how we sort of have the solution. But to your question, Monica, I think that the approach has to be both top down and bottom up. You need leaders that have courage to make sort of difficult decisions and be sort of forthright in terms of how things really are. And when it comes to sort of how do we, in terms of students or our professional staff, or a basic scientist, how do we, the question actually first has to go, please tell me, how do we? The reason that we have sort of such penetrance in terms of our DEI community, in terms of all of our departments at the U, is because everybody's involved. How we do these things together depends on what it's like in the lab, what it's like in your clinic, what's it like in your classroom, virtual or not. And so having that voice is really important in terms of sort of saying, this is the way we're going to give it a go. And as scientists and researchers, we ask the question of like, how's this working? And then if it isn't, we change it in terms of being able to sort of be nimble in that way.
And I also looked at the numbers, so for us as a medical school at Stanford, we have now for 2 years in a row achieved 38% URM in our first and second year medical classes now. That's amazing. At Stanford. That's a huge fundamental change to our School of Medicine. That also gives me the influence to be able to say, we need to not just have our students come join us, but have them be included in the entire community. And what are the unique needs of our students that need to be addressed? So that's first. But then looking at the numbers, we still had a major drop off at the residency and fellowship level. And that was, again, the rationale as to why I needed additional support to create programs and concrete, initiatives to support our residents and recruitment of residents and fellows. Because we were losing where we have, and we will, hopefully not forever, but we continue to lose top candidates to other schools, those who identify as URM, because they, state that they don't have the community yet. And that's what we have now created in our office. And that's the emphasis that we've placed in the recruitment process.
That's right.
Yeah.
And those students will transform your institution. And those faculty who are UAM are going to start leaning into those students as their community as well, which is just going to be so rich and wonderful for you. I'm excited. Dr. Sanchez, you had a question you've been waiting patiently to ask.
No, my apologies. I put in the chat box. I think, offices of DEI are unique in that you have to take care of K through 12, all the way up to our graduate students, our residents, our faculty, and our senior leaders. Then we're also expected to take care of all the different diversity groups. What is our charge in influencing clinical research, education, and service excellence as the pillars? And how have you been able to excel in either some or all of those? Do you feel like it is our responsibility? Is that something that you have assumed to be excellent in all of those? And then how do you manifest that through your office? Because that's a concurrent challenge.
Yeah. One of the programs that I mentioned, the LEAD program, which we have for residents and fellows, it's a 10-month longitudinal program. The mentors are faculty mentors are receiving training, the scholars are receiving training, but ultimately they work on a workshop within that does pertain to the DEI space, but is a concrete, measurable project that they work on together and then ultimately hopefully publish and present at national meetings as well. So I mention that because it truly touches on so many aspects of those pillars that JP just described. So research, the scholars approach this as a scholarly project, doing the in-depth research that is required to, raise the profile of the content to something that is in the language of our academic, world. And it's education. We're educating our community. We present these workshops at the end of the year to our community members here at Stanford. And again, that's service in and of itself as well. So I have tried to always approach it exactly in this way. What are the fundamental key pillars that we value, and how do we incorporate that into the DEI space?
So I think, JP, it all depends on sort of where you're standing, right? So if you're, a DEI officer in pediatrics, and you're in a department that is research intensive, then it just stands to reason you better be DEI research intensive in pediatrics, because that's the fit for the space that you're in, right? And then once established, you can sort of expand from there. As a vice dean for a medical school, everything. I mean, part of the reason sort of coming here is that there were many people sort of doing incredible work. We have our Hope Commission and our Joint Clinical Enterprise that were really sort of getting into the weeds from a granular how do patients come in the door perspective. We have a university that's looking at structural change from an NSF iChange grant. And we had, a number of folks who'd been doing sort of work in DEI that needed sort of help to connect the dots, but also elevation of the conversation and sort of being more explicit about sort of what the culture is, what it aspires to be, and what it really is, and sort of how we need to sort of come in that gap together. So I think that, people joke is like, are you in a department that's big R, little c, medium E? Are you in a department that's big E, little c, whatever, right? You have to figure out what the size of those fonts of those letters. And that's where you need to be sort of responsive, because that's where you are. That's what they value in terms of growing, in terms of sort of making a difference. But fundamentally, everybody has to rise to become vice deans and deans of medical schools so that we can do it across all aspects of mission in terms of really getting it right. And that's the charge.
Well, I see 3 deans in front of me right now.
I do want to get to this issue of psychological safety, because in this past couple of years, we've seen in particular women being targeted for their voices in the DE&I space and their challenging positions in the DE&I space. How do we begin to address this and stop the bullying of DE&I officers, create the safety needed to make change happen without harming our own selves.
Sometimes I think in academic medicine, it's kind of like Game of Thrones. There are ogres that are one-eyed that sort of just can run around, and everybody says, no, everybody behaves, but the ogres can do what they want, right? As long as they're well-funded. And I think that we have to sort of come clean in terms of culture and sexism and hierarchy and shades of what I'm reading, caste, because the ability for people to impose upon others has to do with issues about dominance. And the only way that we can start working with it is if we get it named. You're right. I mean, in terms of issues about sort of, sexism and bullying, it's alive and well. You look at all the statistics. And if you're a woman in medicine, the likelihood that you've not sort of been bullied or had untoward things, you should feel lucky because it's very unusual. That shouldn't be. And when I sort of refer to that trauma-informed, that's in there in terms of we need to actually, all those ground rules that we ever so nicely say at the beginning of a session, which sounds so lovely, it has to be for real, and we have to, the AAMC's Women of Color Intersectionality piece, I had the opportunity of moderating two fabulous gals. And they talked about the difference of, am I calling you in? Am I calling you out, or am I just calling you? All right. And if we call you in, we bother to care about you to sort of resolve things, even though it feels like we're calling you out to sort of hold you to task. But the reality of it is we got to do some calling in medicine of saying, that not cool. What's going on here? And we have to sort of name it and claim it in terms of having people behave as they aspire to be, because we're not there yet in a big way. So it's a real thing. And we have to, as we attack issues about sort of racism and sexism and anti name your group, we have to sort of name that, because that's what maintains sort of the power of how things can be allowed to be okay that are really not okay.
Thank you.
And be upstanders for each other too. So when an issue does awry, inevitably will, that we know that we have each other's support. I've seen medical students, being the upstander for other faculty members. Mm-hmm. And I'm always in awe of our next generation and the empowered, presence that they have within some of these discussions and sessions. And I say they own it, and we should as well for each other.
That's right. I think these are skills that can be taught. These are skills that can be learned. And these are skills that everyone needs to engage in particular for those who are leading with courage, as the two of you are. And so I want to thank you for sharing at every level your personal history, the way that you strive for others, the skills that you have brought to the table and how you've brought others to the table as well. Just remarkable. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for sharing at these levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure presenting, and it was a pleasure getting to know you, Monica. Thanks, JP.
I feel the same. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.